Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a pretty intriguing set of materials.
Yeah, these look at how men and women might experience things like emotion, language, even arousal quite differently.
And what understanding those differences, well, what it could mean for how we communicate.
Exactly. And the core source we're looking at, it's got this, let's say, bold title.
Yeah. The sexual key, how to use the structure of female emotion to arouse a woman in minutes v3. Definitely attention-grabbing.
It is. But beyond the title, our goal is really to dig into the ideas it presents about these distinct emotional and linguistic landscapes.
Right, to see if there's some valuable insights there, about just human interaction in general.
And what makes these sources so, well, thought-provoking is this central argument they make.
Which is?
That women possess what the book calls a highly responsive sexual system.
Okay.
And it's closely linked to language and emotion in ways the book claims are, well, significantly different from men.
So it really challenges some common assumptions, doesn't it?
It does. And it suggests that understanding these fundamental differences could maybe lead to more effective communication, between anyone.
Absolutely. And the source material, it just throws us right in with this fascinating example.
The cafe scene.
Yeah, the cafe scene. Picture this. Just an average-looking guy, apparently, in a cafe.
Mm-hmm.
And he seemingly completely captivates this young woman just by telling her stories.
Stories that are, let's not forget, thematically linked.
Right. And the kicker, they're all centered around sex.
Yeah.
It immediately makes you wonder, can words alone really have that kind of power?
That cafe encounter, it really grabs your attention, doesn't it?
For sure.
It serves as this powerful illustration, maybe an extreme one, but an illustration of the core ideas we're exploring.
So we're going to be looking at what the source calls the structure of female emotional experience.
That and the structure of female language, and crucially, how those two connect. The material strongly suggests women respond to language with maybe a different kind of emotional intensity than men.
And that specific ways of using language could have a really profound effect.
That's the claim. A surprisingly profound effect.
Okay, this idea of structure feels key. Now, the source itself, it kind of anticipates skepticism, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It acknowledges that some of this might sound, well, unexpected.
Especially the idea of such radical differences between men and women.
Right. But it insists that the real understanding, the sort of aha moment, comes from seeing these models in action, in practice.
Okay, so let's delve into that opening cafe story a bit more then. What exactly was this guy saying? What was in these stories?
Well, the anecdote paints a pretty vivid picture. He starts off fairly normally, says she reminds him of a friend from college. Standard opener.
Right.
But then he pivots pretty quickly, talks about his own positive college memories, travel, meeting people, and less subtly getting laid.
Okay, so he goes there quite fast.
He does. And then he escalates the narrative. Tells these increasingly, frankly, unbelievable stories he claims he heard.
Like what?
Like friends supposedly meeting strangers in Berlin and Paris for, sexual encounters.
Wow.
A drunken guy accidentally climbing into the wrong window. A woman impulsively quitting her job for a total stranger.
This is quite a mix.
And even a rock band's alleged public sexual activity with groupies.
So just bam, bam, bam. One sexually charged, increasingly improbable tale after another.
Exactly.
And the woman's reaction. The source describes it as pretty dramatic.
Very. It mentions redness, quivering, even a moment where she seemed to stop breathing.
And the dilated pupils. Said they looked huge. That's a clear physiological sign of arousal, isn't it?
It absolutely is. A striking depiction.
And the outcome.
Also noteworthy, the man says he has to leave, and she just spontaneously offers him her phone number.
You didn't even ask.
Nope. She apparently practically insisted he call her.
Okay. Now, the author's take on this is crucial.
Right. He argues this wasn't just luck, not some one-in-a-million thing.
But an example of a principle.
A widely applicable principle, he claims. He even says he's replicated this kind of rapid arousal using specific language with other women.
Which brings us back to that fundamental question the source poses, right? Why would a man be able to seemingly captivate a woman so intensely just by talking?
Yeah, this really highlights the core difference the material proposes.
How so?
Well, for men, the source suggests the primary trigger for arousal is often visual, the sight of nakedness.
Leading to a desire for immediate action.
That's the idea presented, immediate action.
Okay, and how does it contrast that with women?
It suggests that for women, arousal can often be initiated by language,
Words first.
words creating a sense of comfort, allowing them to form a mental image, maybe even of a naked man.
But it's not that straightforward.
No, the source argues it gets more complex. This initial arousal can then be followed by, like, a rapid-fire consideration of consequences.
Things like pregnancy, relationship impact.
Exactly. Which leads to what the book calls feelings about feelings.
Feelings about feelings. Okay.
And these meta-feelings can apparently end up overriding that initial spark of arousal.
So it's not a direct line. It's much more layered, like a chain reaction.
That's a good way to put it. The source presents this potential chain: physical sensation, maybe excitement, eagerness, lust.
The expected path, maybe.
But then also this desire for emotional connection, maybe physical closeness.
Okay.
But then, according to the source, you can also get memories surfacing or feelings of shame, guilt, powerlessness, even anger.
And these later emotions can just take over.
They can become dominant, supersede the earlier ones.
What's particularly interesting is this assertion the source makes.
About the built-in system.
Yeah, that women have this built-in, automatic, enormously responsive sexual system that's directly connected to language.
A system that the source contends men often don't fully grasp or, utilize effectively.
It really underscores this central theme then.
Yeah.
The potential power of words.
And how they might tap into female emotional and sexual responses in ways that differ fundamentally from how men typically experience these things, according to this material.
Okay, so if language is this powerful key, what are some of the basic principles the source outlines? It introduces these terms, bubblewords and sensewords.
Right. This is where it starts getting quite specific about the how. It argues women process language not just logically, but with significant emotional engagement.
So bubblewords, what are those?
They're described as abstract emotional terms. Think freedom, centeredness, serenity, connection, fulfillment, passion, those kinds of words.
Abstract concepts, feelings, got it.
And sense words.
Those are the concrete sensory details, hot, smooth, sweet, slick, warm, fuzzy, blurry, clear, steady, heavy, glistening, slow. Things you can almost taste or feel.
And the source suggests the real impact comes from using both together. It called it the double lollipop.
Yeah, the double lollipop. That's the idea. Combining those abstract bubble words with the concrete sense words makes female listeners feel good.
That's the claim. It has a particularly positive effect. The source suggests women automatically create internal meanings and, feel the emotions associated with bubble words.
Subconsciously.
Yeah.
Especially in conversation.
Yeah, exactly. It likens it to enjoying a massage or roller coaster. You feel it without necessarily stopping to analyze it intellectually right then and there.
That makes a kind of intuitive sense, tapping into resonance, not just understanding.
Right. And the source draws a contrast here with men, suggesting they often find those bubble words a bit more slippery, less tangible.
And are less consciously aware of experiencing the emotions the word's name.
That's the suggestion, yeah. So moving beyond word types, the source talks about evoking specific emotions using the pink elephant principle.
Yes, the classic, don't think of a pink elephant.
Exactly. It's a really clear illustration. The basic idea is if I tell you not to think of one, you can't help but picture it, right? Just to process the instruction.
You have to imagine it to not imagine it.
Precisely. And the source argues, similarly, when you describe an emotion, the listener imagines it and therefore partially experiences it.
And the more detail, the stronger the effect.
The more detailed and vivid the description, the stronger that emotional response is likely to be. Yes.
And this ties into the don't equals do idea too, right?
Yeah.
Even negation brings the thought forward.
Exactly. Telling someone not to feel anxious can still make them focus on the feeling of anxiety.
And this power of suggestion gets amplified by vivid imagery.
Yes, the source really emphasizes using specific sensory details, colors, sounds, textures, to really engage the imagination.
To bypass the analytical brain, maybe?
Perhaps, gives that example.
Yeah.
Contrasting a lagoon, which is general.
With a detailed description.
Right.
Hidden water, specific colors, sounds.
Right. And how the detailed version creates a much richer, more emotionally resonant picture in the listener's mind.
The source also mentions rapport, that sense of connection. How does that play into this?
Rapport acts like an amplifier, basically. When there's a connection, a listener is more likely to fill in the gaps, even in vague language, with their own meaningful stuff.
Which boosts the emotional impact.
Right, and stories. The source calls them an express lane to the emotions.
Express lane, why?
Because they tend to create a more relaxed, receptive state. almost like a light trance.
So listeners feel the character's emotions more readily.
Yes, and they might also absorb indirect suggestions embedded in the story more easily.
And emotions aren't isolated, are they? The source talks about them being associative, anchoring.
That's right. Emotions can get linked, almost conditioned, to specific stimuli, a word, a gesture, a place.
So you can potentially re-trigger the emotion later using the anchor.
That's the idea behind anchoring, yeah. And then there's the power of metaphors.
How do they fit in?
The source sees them as a way to bypass purely logical thought. Describing one thing in terms of another creates these strong sensory and emotional links.
Like making abstract feelings more concrete or relatable.
Exactly. And it even talks about using clusters of metaphors or even metaphors about metaphors to really layer the effect and make it more powerful.
This all seems to be building towards understanding what the source calls the inward spiral of female emotion. What's the core idea there?
The inward spiral is the source's metaphor for how women, it suggests, experience emotions as these really significant, all-encompassing things.
Like being immersed in an ocean.
Yeah, that's the analogy used. Each emotion is felt as important, needing some kind of processing or resolution, and ultimately shaping the whole experience.
And describing emotions as like places or spaces makes them more relatable.
That's the suggestion. Giving them tangible qualities, describing them as places, spaces, objects, can make them resonate more, according to the source.
And it brings back those meta feelings, feelings about feelings, as being really important here.
Crucial, according to this perspective. Meta feelings are described as how women make sense of the initial physical sensations.
More important than the initial trigger sometimes.
Potentially, yes. The source suggests that while men might link meta feelings back to physical events, for women, the meta-feeling itself takes on greater significance.
And this leads to cascading emotions, one leading to another.
Yes, like a chain reaction, becoming progressively more abstract.
Linking to identity, values, destiny. Big picture stuff.
Exactly. And these more abstract meta-feelings are presented as having the most influence.
And this ties into the idea that women have these like built-in detailed fantasies connected to emotional words.
That's the suggestion. So simply using certain bubble words, especially positive ones together,
Can trigger those internal worlds. Heightened responsiveness.
it might induce a kind of light trance state, yeah, making the listener more drawn into that inward world of feeling and fantasy.
Okay, so moving from the nature of emotion itself, the source then talks about matching thought patterns, a difference in direction.
This is a really key distinction the source draws. It proposes that men's thought tends to be more linear, outward focused.
Like event A leads to event B, meaning comes from the impact.
Right. The example given is, new sports car impress women, not potential for sex. A leads to B, leads to C, focused on external outcomes.
Okay, and women's thought direction.
Is proposed as being more inward, focusing on the emotional responses to events and even the responses to those responses.
So less about the external chain, more about the internal emotional landscape it creates.
Exactly. How does this event make me feel, and how does that feeling connect to my deeper self, my values, etc.?
And the source argues that matching this inward pattern is crucial for connection, even arousal.
Precisely. It suggests you build deeper rapport by verbally mirroring this pattern, suggesting that physical events or initial feelings lead to deeper, more abstract, more powerful emotions.
Like the cycling example.
Right.
Warm legs leads to comfort, leads to peace, connection with self, knowing who you are.
Yeah. That chain, which the source admits might seem preposterous to some men, is claimed to resonate deeply with women's experience.
And it distinguishes between scripts and formulas here.
Right. Scripts are specific words. Formulas are the underlying structure, the concepts. The source really emphasizes understanding the formulas so you can generate your own effective language naturally.
Then the source uses this analogy. The battlefield versus the wishing well?
Yeah.
Male versus female mythic patterns.
It's a very evocative way it frames these potential core differences in motivation or life approach.
So men are on the battlefield, focused outward.
Focus on the external world, yeah. Concrete data, tasks, challenges, proving themselves through struggle and mastery, targeting, confronting, struggling, mastering, leading to tangible rewards.
And women are at the wishing well, focused inward.
Focused on their internal, hidden and unknown depths, seeking self-understanding, understanding their needs, realizing, accepting, opening, connecting, incorporating, leading to emotional realizations.
Self-discovery is the goal, maybe?
In this view, yes. Every experience is an opportunity for self-discovery.
So describing emotions and experiences using that realization cycle framework.
is presented as a way to connect more profoundly with women, aligning with what the source sees as a fundamental pattern.
Which then leads into creating meaning through emotion and space. How does that work?
Well, first, it suggests women use complex language to create complex feelings and meaning. And it builds on that idea of emotions as emotional places.
Places. How so?
The idea is that your current overall emotional state, your emotional place, really colors how you interpret new experiences.
So if you want someone to feel open to intimacy, for example.
The advice is to use language to describe and evoke an emotional place where intimacy feels natural and right. Like that description of a comfortable, sensual space pillows, warmth, candlelight. You create the feeling of the place with words.
And then it gets into using language that subtly suggests penetration, entering, filling voids.
Yes, as a form of erotic metaphor, using that kind of spatial language when describing positive emotions.
Like happiness or excitement coming inside.
That's one type of example given. It gets quite specific, suggesting metaphorical links to physical arousal.
Warming, melting, opening, sliding. Even things like drinking in breath, kneeling down, exploding, shuddering.
Yes, using words related to those actions or sensations metaphorically to subtly evoke the physical feelings associated with sex.
And the key, according to the source, is to do this while acting completely oblivious.
Maintain a straight face, yeah. Act as if the erotic metaphor is unintentional, just a figure of speech.
So it's subtle suggestion, allowing the listener to feel it without feeling directly targeted.
That seems to be the idea. Bypassing inhibitions, perhaps? This all feeds into the concept of the female sexual ramp.
Okay, that sounds like a model for arousal progression. What are the stages?
It outlines what the source sees as a potentially more complex decision-making process for sex for women. The proposed stages are: 1, focus getting her attention.
Stand out somehow.
2, intrigue curiosity, making her wonder about you, how you fit into her world.
Yeah.
3, connection building rapport, shared understanding, often linked to ideas of fate or destiny in the source.
Deeper than just small talk.
4, sexual desire, so lust, plus the possibility of acting on it.
Right.
And 5, trust comfort about acting on that desire. Feeling assured it will be a positive experience afterwards, no regrets.
So it's really not just about sparking lust. There's this crucial emotional groundwork. Intrigue, connection.
Absolutely. The source really stresses laying that foundation before focusing heavily on the sexual desire part.
And cycling through them. Keep building connection.
Exactly. Cycling through intrigue, connection, and desire, but always reinforcing and intensifying the connection aspect. And again, the claim is you can induce these states by describing them.
Okay. The source then discusses what it claims women want to feel. Key values or criteria.
These are presented as common underlying desires that the source suggests resonate widely. Things like physical safety.
But implied through comfort, not discussed directly.
Right, implied through relaxation, then emotional connection, trust, that feeling of destiny or things being meant to be. A sense of surrender to something larger than oneself, and also emotional variety, experiencing a range of feelings, not just one note.
It also touches on some maybe more challenging ideas, like women yearning for safety, but also being drawn to strength or dominance.
Yes, and again, we're relaying the source's perspective here. It suggests that what might seem like bitchy behavior could sometimes be an unconscious attempt to elicit a dominant response.
And that women might identify with a partner's perceived strength, see dominance as protective.
That's the interpretation offered. It even mentions the presence of what it calls masochistic elements in some female fantasies.
It also talks about competition and rejection.
Yeah, it suggests competition for a man can increase his value in women's eyes, fitting with a one perfect guy ideal. And that rejection can be a powerful motivator, creating a desire to show him or win approval.
And the overarching desire is to feel more, deeper, more powerful emotions.
That's a key claim. That women often seek emotional experiences that surpass what they've felt before. Alluding to this can apparently build rapport.
This leads into the archetype. Holding out for a hero, the powerful man. What defines him according to the source?
It's less about traditional power markers like money or status necessarily, and more about specific attitudes and behaviors.
Okay, like what?
Independence, he doesn't seem needy, might even subtly reject her attention. His goals are clearly paramount. Determination, he persists without complaining. A sense of superiority, she's not placed on some unattainable pedestal. And being challenging, maybe subtly undermining her confidence.
Those last two sound quite Manipulative.
They are presented as attributes of this specific archetype within the source material, yes. And it even suggests behaviors to convey this power.
Like being remote, using silence.
Remoteness, yeah. Limited self-disclosure, and even alternating what it calls angry intensity with cold inaccessibility.
Like sticks and carrots. Intensity and coldness are sticks. Verbal stimulation is the carrot.
That's the framing used, yes. The idea presented is that this distance and unpredictability can create intrigue and a desire for connection. Paradoxical, maybe, but that's the claim.
To refine the approach, the source outlines 4 modes of female response: revealers, concealers.
Contrarians and sensualists. It's an attempt to tailor communication based on how someone seems to respond.
So revealers like to talk, so listen.
Basically. Concealers are more reserved, so you feed them descriptions and observations.
Contrarians focus on differences, disagree.
Yeah, so the suggested tactic is using negations, challenges, being more forceful. It even mentions that for warrior contrarians, blatant dominance can equate to strength.
Okay. And sensualists.
Respond well to descriptions of physical pleasure, less patient with abstract talk, so focus on sensual sexual language and move towards physical touch sooner.
One principle that seems universal in the source is exhibiting emotion to induce it. Leading by example.
Exactly. To inspire an emotion, you have to embody it first. Through your look, sound, actions, widen eyes for surprise, voice changes, gestures.
Show, don't just tell.
Pretty much.
Then there's the concept of soft eyes, pupil dilation.
Yeah, this gets into subtle nonverbal cues. Pupils dilate when we're pleased or attracted, constrict when displeased. It's noticed subconsciously.
And dilated pupils make you look more attractive, suggest attraction.
That's the idea. And the source suggests that focusing inward on imagination, emotions, memories, like entering a light trance, naturally causes pupils to dilate.
Making you look dreamy, sensitive, in touch.
And less threatening. This apparent inward focus builds rapport, encourages the other person to also look inward safely, and dilated pupils, when talking about emotion, supposedly amplify the feeling for both speaker and listener.
This inward focus is a real recurring theme, isn't it? It connects to congruent embodiment, too.
Absolutely. Aligning your words and your body language, making sure your expressions, posture, tone match the bubble words you're using.
Like open and expansive for wonder, narrow eyes, and contain gestures for passion.
Right, experimenting with embodying those qualities, this consistency, this internal alignment, makes you seem more trustworthy, compelling, believable.
And to have something compelling to say, the source stresses cultivating inner wealth, tapping into personal experiences.
Yeah, being able to describe your own experiences in detail, linking them to emotional states, even mundane ones.
How do you do that?
The technique suggested is literally listing experiences, jobs, travel, whatever, and noting what you saw, imagined, heard, told yourself, felt emotionally and physically.
And emphasizing the link to emotions, even if you have to fudge it a bit.
Finding the worthwhile emotional angle, yeah. Like that example of reframing making widgets as this passionate, almost spiritual connection. Finding the story within the ordinary.
Okay, before getting to the specific pickup strategy, it outlines 2 strategies for seduction. Focus on pleasure.
Right. The overall goal presented is lead the listener to experience more pleasure than before.
How? Strategy 1.
Get her thinking about a pleasurable experience she hadn't considered. Open a new door to pleasure in her mind.
Strategy 2.
Get her thinking about a latent, maybe dormant, pleasurable fantasy or memory. Reawaken something already there.
And the progression is key. Start with comfort, move through wonder, pleasure, passion.
And love surrender, yeah. Gradually increasing the intensity, weaving in more erotic metaphors as you go.
While acting totally unaware of the sexual undertones.
That's the suggested approach. Keep that straight face.
This all builds up to a very detailed pickup outline. A structured approach.
It is quite structured. Breaks it down into gears, almost.
Ignition, first gear. Comfort, second gear. Excitement.
Third gear, sexuality now, and fourth gear, sexuality now, escalation.
So ignition is just the opening. Getting attention. Needs to be original, playful.
Yeah, stop her. Focus her attention. Then first gear is all about establishing comfort and rapport, mirroring, describing comfort, using stories.
Asking questions about values, like if you could be anywhere, or just telling a story.
Both are options. The focus is comfort and connection first.
Then second gear amps things up, excitement.
Amplify her responses, yeah. Through stories of others' excitement, exaggerating sensory details in her descriptions, using NLP submodalities or that emotional cascading.
Linking bubble words in sequence, right? Comfort, peace, connection.
Exactly. Then third gear explicitly brings in the erotic component.
Through those erotic metaphors we discussed.
Metaphors, quoting suggestive lines someone else supposedly said, telling sexual stories, even sexual jokes.
And fourth gear is the final push. Escalation.
More direct, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe verbally matching something she said, then making a blunt proposition, or asking suggestive questions, or just a direct sexual proposition. The source gives examples for all these.
It even provides a sample sexuality monologue, doesn't it? Pulling it all together.
Yes, a sustained example using bubble words, sensory details, erotic metaphors, referencing other stories, trying to link all the induced feelings directly to the speaker.
With me.
Now, it's certainly a very detailed and pretty direct approach laid out there.
It is. It aims to be a practical framework for applying all the preceding ideas in that specific context. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the big takeaways from this material?
Well, the core idea presented is that women might experience language and emotion really differently from men. That's the foundation.
And their arousal system is potentially deeply tied to this emotional language.
That's the claim. And understanding concepts like bubble words, sense words, the pink elephant principle, that inward spiral, the female sexual ramp, it offers a unique, though definitely debatable, perspective on female inner experience.
And revisiting that initial cafe story, it seems a little less baffling through this lens, maybe.
Perhaps less absurd, as the source put it. The rapid-fire themed stories, even the wild ones, you could interpret them as an application, deliberate or intuitive, of these ideas about emotional language and imagery.
The outcome becomes less mysterious if you accept the premises, highlighting the potential impact of communication targeted at emotional processing.
Exactly. It suggests that how you communicate, aiming for that specific kind of resonance, might have a significant effect.
All right. And a final thought for our listeners to ponder.
Mm-hmm.
While, a lot of this source material is very focused on romantic or sexual contexts,
Very much so.
consider how some of these underlying ideas, the power of emotional language, the tendency towards inward reflection, the impact of sensory details might apply more broadly.
To all sorts of communication.
Yeah. What new possibilities for connection, for understanding might open up if we were more conscious of these different ways people might process things emotionally, linguistically, in our daily interactions, not just in dating.
That's a really interesting question to consider, how understanding these potential differences could improve communication everywhere.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.